Has someone ever challenged you to something that they didn't know who are an expert at? If so, how did it turn out for you them? Mine's kind of dumb, but I think it still counts. At work I'm kind of the Google Sheets expert and I make lots of tools for different departments to use. Enter new guy who needed to collect, aggregate and display a bunch of data. My boss was like, send Wish a calendar invite so you can tell her what you want and she'll set it up for you. New guy was having none of that and insisted he was going to do it himself. Well, a week later, he finally has this shitty sheet that doesn't have half the information we need. And we have to have the numbers for the state by tomorrow. So my boss asks me to fix it and new guy is like, yeah, okay, that's not really possible. This is as good as it's going to get. 2 hours later, I send them both a fully functional and automated sheet that does everything we need. And we'll be able to use it indefinitely, which means next time and every time the stupid state report is due, it will already be done. New guy was like, I would have added that in if I'd had more time. I once went to a museum with my sister and her friend, who I hadn't met before. We got to the Greek art bit and her friend started telling me how she was super into Greek myth. And I thought that was cool, because I was, unbeknownst to her, doing a master's in it at the time, and also keeping a blog of myth retellings, which was pretty popular, and it was a relief to have something in common with this stranger. She then got weirdly haughty and told me she probably knew more myths than I did. So, being polite, I didn't challenge her on it and just asked her to tell me her favorite so that we could have a conversation about it. She proceeded to tell me the myth of Daedalus and the Minotaur. I asked her how she'd heard of that one, because it's fairly obscure. She told me she'd read it on a viral blog post on a blog about mythology. It was my blog. A buddy mine was at a concert in bad seats and started complaining about it via Twitter. All of a sudden the band starts reading some tweets and calls my friend up to sit on stage for a couple songs. They sit him at the piano and during the next song, they jokingly go okay piano solo. The crowd laughs for a second, but then my buddy just starts jamming out as he plays piano in his band. Talk about dream moment getting to play with your favorite band. I once challenged a girl who was a friend to football, not knowing she grew up with a table in her house and older brothers. I even, jokingly, put money on the game. Well, I learned a bit about humility that night. The icing on the cake was when she drove me to an at the moment to get her the money. Basketball. I'm a very unassuming looking guy. 5 feet 8, 150 pounds. Not a tattoo to be found. But back in the day, I was pretty athletic and could hang in games with fringe D1 semi-pro guys. But I can't emphasize how much I didn't look like it at all. Anyway, in college, hanging out in someone's room, it came up that I'd play a bit, and some dude I didn't know started running his mouth about how he could destroy me. Just wouldn't stop talking. I gave him every out, until it basically became personally offensive. Other guys were a bit tired of this asshole hanging around, and they knew I could play. So we all trooped over to the gym, late as duck in the dead of winter, so we could settle things. 11-0 the first game. Not sure if we played after that, but I remember it was 11-0, because I made sure to not let the guy score, and I'm a pretty mellow guy and usually would have laid off and let him score a couple when it was clear that I was better. But this guy was a real asshole, so I just clamped down on him start to finish. I blocked a ton of his shit. He stopped hanging around nearly as much after that. So I was kind of a hero to the rest of the guys. Like Street Patrick drove that snake out of our nation. Edit now that I think of it. Being a short, skinny white guy who didn't try to look like I was a player. Every time I stepped onto a new court, I had every other person on the floor just automatically dismiss me. You get used to it. Respect, in this case, had to be 100% earned. Every time. I remember one time, after college, I moved to a new city to start a new job. New co-workers were looking for a fourth guy to fill out their 3-on-3 team. They were not shy in expressing their doubts about me and how well I'd be able to hang with them. By the end of our first practice, They were telling me I should have played at the local D1 school. Edit, I wasn't that good. But it's the thought that counts. By our first game, they were clearing out when I had the ball. Those days are long gone, and I've moved on to other interests. But I'm very thankful that I had those experiences. My uncle challenged Jack Nicklaus to a golf game in college. Without a clue. The humiliation burns him to this day. While I'd never claim I was an expert, I used to be pretty damn good at pool. My aunt and uncle had a pool table downstairs, and my parents, for a variety of reasons, would go over regularly and spend all day there. There was nothing else for us, me and my brother, to do, so we just played pool all day for years. Eventually we got bored and saw that he had a book on trick shots, so we started doing that for fun. Never really mastered them, but they made for really good practice in understanding how to get the ball to do what you want. So anyway, for my buddy's 20th birthday, he wanted to go to a pool hall and invited a ton of people. Then he told he it was going to be a tournament, drinks for individual games, and a 50-50 type of deal. For the winner he gets half regardless, because it was his birthday. Insisted I come, and I caved eventually. Get there. First game, they break, and that was the only shot they got. Rest of mine were pretty similar. At the end I just looked at him. Told you not to invite me. Found out after that a bunch of them had never even played pool before. Felt pretty bad, so I took the money and bought everyone drinks with it. I would never go as far to say that I'm a fencing expert, but I have been fencing casually for about 5 years total, and consider myself pretty good for someone who's casual. A new person came to our fencing practice and demanded of a few men that we do a King of the Hill style matchup. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but I could smell the toxic behavior rolling off of him when everyone declined. But he continued to insist we do it. He somehow fixated on me, and I decided I'd give it a go on a normal 15-point bout. Initially I always fence one style, in order to test out my opponent, before switching to a style to trump his. So the first few points I see him cheering himself on as he established a 1-2 point lead by 4-2 in his favor. I already figured out all the flaws in his fencing style, and proceeded to get the next 10 points without losing one round. I could see the guy fuming at the end when I beat him 15-5. It was a good feeling. A guy I went on a date with tried to serenade me with his okay piano skills. He was incredibly patronizing to me and tried to explain to me what the notes were even when I told him I'm also a pianist. So after his endless explanations I asked him to move over on the bench so I can try to play. I'm a 2-time Carnegie Hall pianist. He never called me back afterwards. Worth it. I asked an 11-year-old if he wanted to play pool with me at a small rec room at a place I was staying at in Alaska. Turns out he competed nationally. I won the first one because he scratched on the 8-ball, even though I had only pocketed 2. Then he cleaned up the next 2 games without giving me a chance to get more than 1 inch. I was maybe 19 then. A neighbor on my block in Brooklyn challenged me to a pizza bake-off. I recently catered pizza for my daughter's school and word got around the neighborhood my pizza was pretty darn good. My first thought was, this guy is a Brooklyn native. My pizza will be shite compared to his. But there was something about him bragging that I couldn't resist the challenge. He talked up how pizza was in his blood, how his dad ran the pizza place around the corner years ago. I remained silent and let my skills answer for themselves. I got a buddy to let us use one of Baker's Pride ovens at his restaurant. We even had total strangers try our pizzas. Every last person chose my pizza over his. I never mentioned to him that I've worked in pizza places almost every day for the last 30 years. I never mentioned that when I'm not working at a pizza place I'm making pizzas at home at least once every 2 days. I never mentioned that at 9 years old I knew that I wanted to be a pizza man. Here I'm 45 and getting ready to start my own pizza business. You go, you crazy pizza man. Not me, but my brother best friend. We were in Baltimore for a baseball weekend in 2009 and hanging out at a bar across from Camden Yards. They had a Silver Strike bowling video game. At our local bar back in Boston we had one as well. I'm decent at the game, but my brother and buddy were ducking amazing at this game. Bowling 300 games and whatnot. So two dudes are playing this game and drinking. We ask them if we can play when they are done. They ask if we want to play them. We said sure. My brother and buddy destroy these guys. Like it wasn't even close. These dudes said it was a fluke and they wanted a rematch, but this time for a round of beers. Again. Annihilation City. But they kept wanting to play. To eventually win a game. No lie. After 13 rounds of beers they finally gave up. They were great guys. We saw them the next day at the same bar and they walked up to us with beers in hand already and said rematch. To this day we still hang out with them whenever we go to Baltimore. And to this day, they have never won. Edit for details. The guys were buying 2 beers each time they lost a game to the 2 guys they lost to. For my brother and friend. The beers were Natty Bob, which is Baltimore's cheap gross awesome beer. I can't remember the price. But they were under $2 a piece back then. They would buy the beers and they'd just start piling up on the table next to the machine. So we were all just drinking them. I'd say around 25-30 beers between the 5 of us in 4 or 5 hours. Tab was probably $60-ish for beers, but we were there all night getting wings and a million apps, so we all just paid the tab anyways. I'm a mechanic. This happens on a daily basis. One of my favorites from messing with a buddy. I was helping him fix his truck in my garage for free. By helping, I mean I was fixing his truck for free. Me, your map sensor is bad. Them pretty sure it's the plugs or wires. Me, no. Your spark is fine. Fuel pressure is fine. Air is fine. Your fuel regulation is the issue, which is why there is fuel in your oil. Them, you sure it's not the spark plugs? How do you actually know? Me hands them a spark plug still hooked up to the coil wire and presses the remote start button. Then what the duck ein heck man? Me spark is fine, isn't it? Them, how much is a map sensor? My office announced a laser tag team building event 2 weeks after I played in the Laser Tag Ultrazone National Championships, which were an actual thing in 1997. When working as a teacher I beat a lot of students in Pokemon battles, cause they didn't think of me being like 15 years ahead of them in fighting experience. Noobs. I dated a guy in college who was incredibly book smart, working on his masters with the intention to pursue a PhD. I was doing the good old 5-year plan for college and quite content with my level of brain power compared to his. What he underestimated was my fondness for word games, especially Scrabble. I like to think I'm quite good. Well, in the 3 years we dated, we only played Scrabble once, and I beat the shit out of him. The icing on the cake was when I got a 50+ word score for playing one letter. He literally wiped all the letters off the board and had a mini hissy fit, claiming that I cheated. I got out my trusty Scrabble dictionary and proved his loss. Not a physical challenge, but I sell building materials for a living, think Home Depot, but for guys that build skyscrapers and stadiums. There has been many occasions where an old man with zero construction knowledge tries to lecture me on what I do for a living. People say all kinds of random shit, how weather and climate functions. I'm a meteorologist in disguise, work as a data scientist, but has a master's and a PhD in meteorology. When I politely and gently inform them how things actually work, people are usually super interested to know more. But occasionally I got something like, oh yeah. And how do you know? Well, I have published several papers on the matter. Would love to discuss it all night. So far, they've all backed down after that. When I was around 10, there was an old man with Alzheimer's in my neighborhood who would often approach my friends and I. He would ask us questions that we obviously didn't know the answer to, such as what's the square root of 2, which was one of his favorites. One day I decided I'd memorize the square root of 2 to 20 digits. Sure enough, he did ask me the question again, and I was totally prepared. He was extremely impressed, and of course he forgot who I was, so would continue to ask over and over again. My landlord tried blaming me for damage to the kitchen cabinets, but didn't know that I'm in construction, and am very familiar with home building codes. They placed the cabinets too close to the stove and the glue that held the laminate had melted. Someone at a bar bet me there were only 30 days in a particular month. 20 if I could prove them wrong right then pre-cell phone days. I was born on the 31st of that month. Showed them my driver's license. For reference, this is clay pigeon shooting, kinda known as trap in the south. Well, I'm from a rural area and not exactly super southern, so when I'd go to other trap fields to practice different conditions there's always be a smartass or two try and place a bet with me. This is definitely an old money sport with some of the guns going upwards of $5,000. I had an old BT-100 that we got in a trade for lead shot and some cash on the side. While not cheap, it was still much lower than other people's guns and people would take that as me being a newbie. They'd learn pretty quick though, since the team I was on went to the nationals almost every year from 11 to 18. It was always funny, because some would be good sports, but others would throw an absolute fit. I saw a guy damage a 10,000 Pirazzi because someone else beat him before. Even funnier part is there was a guy from the county next to us who could blow us out of the water and he always shot with an 870 pump from Walmart. Not really a you got owned moment, but in college my buddies and I always got the new fighting game when it came out and would put in a couple hundred hours or so on it, basically king around with it in online or practice mode before dropping it. But during that time we'd have fight nights couple times a week where we'd all get together at someone's place and duke it out. Loser switches controllers. It's not like I never won, but I was always just middle of the pack, and after 2 years of this literally no one would consider me to be some fighting game wizard, quite the opposite if anything. Then, for the first time ever, the group decided to pick up a third fighter instead of a second one, Soul Calibur 3 I think. And unknown to anyone in our play group I'd grinded Soul Calibur I for 10 hours a day, every day, for 4 years, against 5 people who were doing the same and were just as good as me. It honestly wasn't even fun. After the first half hour they were playing with 200% health, while I was playing with 50%, picking random character select, and I still hadn't passed the controller once, and thus it was tacitly agreed that we would all play second fighters from then on. Camped out for tickets to the Phantom Menace. Guy in a group behind me challenged everyone to Star Wars Trivial Pursuit for money. It got to my first turn and I ran the board and won without anyone else getting to go. I felt bad, so I didn't even take his money. He still accused me of having memorized the cards to cheat. Nope. Just seen the original trilogy dozens of times all my life. Chess. I'm a chess master. I think when people hear that they're like, oh he's really good at chess. But what it means is that I've played in international tournaments and beaten other masters and some governing body has given me a title. Anyway, I get challenged a lot by friends who think they are pretty good. What they don't realize is that your average pretty good player is getting destroyed by your average tournament player, and your average tournament player is getting destroyed by a master. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe,